kind of seen some of these signs, what do you do now? I think the way that I was thinking about this and I think this is how we end up thinking about startups is like learnings kind of generate new ideas or kind of bets, and then those generate kind of growth. And so there's this kind of like you learn about customers, you come up with new ideas on what to try, and then those things kind of like generate growth. And so you can almost, if you have that as a frame, you can almost kind of debug like what's happening with your startup. So, and maybe we'll put this up as part of the podcast, but I basically made this table of kind of like what are all the different things if you're kind of like missing it and stuff. um, Brian, maybe a good place to kind of jump into this is what do you think is the hardest part? Do you think people have the hardest time, and based on our work at Iterative, the hardest time getting learnings, the hardest time turning those learnings into bets, or the hardest time turning those bets into growth? Where do you feel like people kind of like are most challenged?
Uh, okay, to be completely honest,
Yeah.
I think it's none of them. Like
Oh, really?
typically, yeah, typically what happens, I think, and I'd love your opinion on this
Yeah.
because, again, this is Southeast Asia specific. We talked to so many founders. It's that it's that you are working on the other stuff, right? You're working on like building your MVP, and you're like, oh, I'm
Mm.
learning because I'm building my MVP, or like, oh, I need to figure out how to like file taxes. This doesn't happen, but it's like I had
Yeah.
to learn how to like do all my like back office
Yeah.
accounting, whatever, right? And I need to figure out how to like hire a co-founder. So there's like all this like extraneous stuff that happens, and the time that you're spending on learnings, bets, and growth is like 10% or less,
Mm.
maybe like 5% of less. Uh, yeah,
Do
good.
you, do you feel like that ratio is different in San Francisco? Do you feel like people are spending more time on learning bets and growth in San Francisco? And is that kind of your observation between the two?
I I think so, but I also don't want to like overgeneralize because
Yeah.
there's obviously kind of like people that are doing
Yeah.
things differently in each place. I do feel like there's again like more of like a startup culture, right? Of like people doing it, and what you end up doing is you end up emulating people who do things around you, right? Like
Mm.
successful founders who do things around you, and just because there's so many more founders who care about learnings, distributions, users. You cannot stop hearing about this, right? At like coffee shops, and you end up doing that. And so maybe it's kind of like a learned behavior.
What do you think is the right distribution? Like, how much of, like, if you could magically create startup founders in a lab, what percentage of
Yeah,
the time do you think they should be working on learning bets and growth?
100%.
Yeah, okay, that was my answer too. It's like everything, nothing else matters. This is the only thing that matters, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you don't get this right, especially, I feel like, especially in the early stage. I mean, later stage, I think this changes a little bit, but in the early stage, it's like you should just be spending 100% of your time trying to like learn from your users, turning those learnings into kind of like ideas or bets for growth, and then like growing. And everything
yeah,
else kind of like doesn't matter that much.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like people should just spend 100% of their time on this.
Yeah, it's like we can talk more about like learning stats of growth, but it's like the higher level for me is like how do you minimize the time you're working on everything else and then
Everything else.
maximize the time you're working on this, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're coding, stop coding. Like use no code, I don't know, stuff, right? If you're not
Yeah.
talking to users, go talk to users. If you I don't know, if you're trying to figure out your like accounting, hire an accountant. Right. There's like much more higher leverage stuff that you should be doing at the very early days than a lot of what people are doing now.
And maybe just to kind of add on to that bit a little bit, the founders should be working on this, right? Like this
Yeah.
is only founders can work on this, and so founders should be kind of spending their time. Founders don't need to be doing accounting. They don't need to be worrying about kind of like on all of that kind of stuff. They should be just focused on kind of like this specifically. Um,
Yeah.
I feel like in
Uh, sorry, Sukad.
yeah,
I feel so passionate about this because
yeah,
I see it wrong all the time. I need to like voice
yeah,
a, a very good example of an early trap here is also sales,
yes,
team
yes,
building, right?
yes,
So people are like, oh, I got this, people want my product. And then all of a sudden they're like, how do I hire like 10 salespeople to like talk to, or like BD people or whatever? Like you're like prematurely growing sales.
yeah,
And oftentimes you see the founders then like remove themselves away from talking to customers. And uh, you don't realize this. 3 months in, 6 months in, you now don't have the like feedback channel anymore.
Yeah.
And so you're going in a direction that's probably completely wrong for your company. And so, yeah, very, very easy early trap to fall into.
I just want to double down on this and like
Yeah.
overlay it on top of it on the learnings bets growth thing. If the founder is not doing sales, your salespeople are not going to be able to kind of like get the same learnings as the founder, and frankly, they're not kind of paid to like do that. And so, like, if you are a founder and you are not doing sales in the early days yourself, you are not getting the learnings that you could be getting. And if you're not getting the learnings, then you're not coming up with ideas on how you can grow in any of the bets, and then you're just not going to grow, right? And so it's like a very kind of structural piece. Like if you aren't learning about your users, like nothing else at your startup is going to work, right? Like you don't get a pass go, you don't collect $200 or whatever in Monopoly. Like if you don't have learnings, none of this kind of like matters. Um, and so, we work with this and the people in the batch, but founders should definitely be doing sales. They should be doing the kind of like customer support and all that. You want to be as close to learnings as possible, just because you need to be able to like do that to kind of get everything else. Um, Brian, I feel like when we're working with the batch, it's like a very easy tell of like whether this company is going to be successful or not based on like how close the founders are to kind of this. You and I sometimes talk about we're like, oh man, this company is they're in like company building mode too early, and it's exactly what you're saying where they just started hire their like full time job is like hiring lots of people instead of like learning about their customers, and like we're almost always going to be like, yeah, the startup's probably not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.